Right, so here we are. My name's Kevin Duffy. This is the Scottish Engineering Monthly Breakfast Briefing, and this month it is on the riveting topic, but very useful topic of layoff and short-time working. So I'm going to take you through that legal topic as well, giving a brief overview of what this area actually covers, some of the legal definitions that are involved, because this is going to be quite a kind of technical employment law topic, because it's covered off in quite some detail in the Employment Rights Act 1996. We'll go into the legal requirements of what's from both the employer side and the employee side, and we'll talk about how this area interacts with redundancy as well, because as you'll see, this has quite an important interaction with the area of redundancy, because it's basically seen as the second bullet point says, an alternative to redundancy. Basically, short-time working and layoff is used where there is some sort of unexpected downturn or unforeseen circumstances that mean the business cannot continue at the same level as it has been beforehand. So rather than having to go through a redundancy process and dismissing people, i.e. permanently removing them from the workplace, you can use short-time working and layoff clauses if you have them, and I'll touch on that in a second, to effect a temporary reduction in staff, which might get you over the short-term cash flow issue that the business is facing. So rather than having to go through an extended redundancy process, as if you're over 20, you have to go through the collective consultation process as well, which takes a much longer and involved effort from the employer, and having to go through actual dismissals, which always leaves you open to potential unfair dismissal claims. And obviously with redundancy, you have to pay a redundancy pay as well. So it can be quite expensive to go through redundancy processes. Whereas with layoff and short-time working, what you have here, the layoff is where the employer provides the employee with no work and no pay whilst retaining them as employees. And a slightly different version of that is short-time working, is where the employees remain employees, but the employer provides them with less work and less pay at that particular time as well during that period. So they're almost like different bits of the spectrum. At one bit with the layoff, you've got no pay and no work. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got some pay and some work as well. For the statutory definition of short-time working, you have to go to less than half a week's pay. So what that can mean is that employers can put employees on, inverted commas, short-time working by, say, for example, reducing their pay by 25%. That is still a form of short-time working, but it's not the statutory type of short-time working. And that has implications, which I'll discuss in a second. So to actually put your staff on short-time working and layoff, you have to have the contractual power to do so. So that will often be a clause in the contract that says, depending on the needs of the business, the employer may reduce the employee's hours to zero, or a form the company requires from time to time, and reduce your pay accordingly. It has to say something specifically like that. Now, it can be actually in the contract itself or some other document which is incorporated into the contract. For example, a collective agreement if you have come from a trade unionised organisation, workplace. Now, importantly, the contractual clause has to cover off both of those two aspects. It has to say we can reduce your hours and we can reduce your pay as well, because the law on reduction in staff members' pay, deduction in wages, is very heavily geared towards the protection of the employee. It has to be in the contract. It has to be agreed before the event that causes the reduction in pay, hence why you get the people to sign a contract beforehand. Now, if you don't have that contractual power to put people on to short-time working or layoff, and you try to exercise that so-called, then you're doing so in unilateral breach of contract, and that leaves you open to a constructive unfair dismissal risk. Now, you may have heard of constructive dismissal before. It's where the employer behaves so badly that the employee can deem themselves to have been constructively dismissed, basically pushed out of the organisation. Now, that can take place in quite malicious circumstances, for example, where the employee is subject to a long period of discriminatory conduct. But ultimately, it's not to do with the malice, it's to do with the actual relationship between the organisation and the employee. If the employer acts in fundamental breach of contract, i.e. not paying somebody when they don't have their contractual ability to not pay them, then that is a constructive dismissal situation, potentially. So what that final bullet point says there is, if you don't have the contractual power, don't unilaterally impose it, bilaterally seek to negotiate one with the employees. Now that might involve, that will involve sitting down with the employees or the employee reps and saying, the company is facing X, Y, and Z financial difficulties. If we don't go through this, then we may have to make some compulsory redundancies. Rather than go through that, we would like to put you on short-term working and or layoff, which means we can reduce your pay for X period of time. And that will mean it will obviously be a bit of a detriment on you people. However, it will mean that nobody loses their job. And we'll get an order in 2 months' time, and that will bring everybody back up. So, as I say, it's a negotiation, it's a consultation, and you're trying to use your persuasion skills and consultation skills to try and get that bilateral agreement from the employees. Did somebody have a question there? Obviously, I'm happy to take any questions as we're going along. That's fine, just move on then. Right, so if you have the contractual power to reduce somebody's pay and reduce somebody's hours, either completely in a layoff situation or just in short-time working, then you have to choose which people are going to be doing it. It might be relatively straightforward. You're putting the entire business onto short-term working or layoff, or you're putting a particular department onto short-term working or layoff that particular department makes a particular gadget and the supply chain or an order has not came through. So it's quite obvious which discrete group of employees you're choosing. However, it might not be that quite straightforward. For example, you may only have to have one person from that department, 2 people from that department, 1 person from that department. How do you choose between them? Now, for anyone who's went through a full redundancy consultation and selection process, they'll know that you have to have objective criteria, things like disciplinary history, skills, qualifications, absence history perhaps as well. I would always urge anyone who's going through a short-term working and layoff selection process to have at least go through a similar type of thought process. It doesn't have to be as rigid as the thought process that you go through for redundancy selection, but you need to be wary of discriminatory selection. For example, heaven forbid, you put all the pregnant people, all the pregnant ladies on short-term working, or you pick on all the people who have a disability. They're the ones that are put on short-term working or layoff. Those would be wrong. They would be opening you up to some sort of discrimination claim, most certainly. And again, if you were to behave so badly and so without rationale, then that might again raise a constructive unfair dismissal risk. All I'm saying is, as per that second bullet point, have some sort of justifiable rationale that you can certainly put to some basically an employment tribunal if you're ever challenged on that particular front. So, as I mentioned earlier on, there is some sort of interaction with redundancy because it is short-term working is an alternative to redundancy. You're trying to reduce the company's costs, staffing costs, for a finite period of time rather than having to get rid of people entirely. Because obviously, if you get rid of people, you might have difficulty getting them back. And with the skills shortage and the recruitment issues that I'm hearing from many member companies, you might just want to go through the short-term pain of keeping people on a lower amount of money and ability with the hope to try and retain them. Now, as it says there, there's theoretically no upper limit on the time frame that you can keep somebody on layoff or short-time working. But there are 2 thresholds, time thresholds you need to be aware of. If somebody has been placed on layoff short-time working for either 4 or more consecutive weeks or 6 non-consecutive weeks in a 13-week period, then what happens is that gives the employees the ability to resign and say that this is actually not a short-time issue, this is actually a more longer-term matter, and I actually want my redundancy pay. It's actually a redundancy situation, and that's what they try and say. If the employee thinks that is the case, then there are a number of actions that the employee has to carry out. The first one is that they have to resign and submit what's known as a written notice of intention to claim. That's them actually saying in writing, I no longer think this is a short-time working and layoff situation. I think this is a full redundancy situation. I therefore want my redundancy money. Now, the employer can resist that claim from the other side, from the employee, by serving what's known as counter notice within that 1 week. Now, the timeframes in the Employment Rights Act here are very, very strict, and there's really not that much flex, if any, for the employer or the employee. They have to put in that written notice, and to resist it, the employer has to put in the counter notice within that 1 week as well. And the counter notice has to say quite specifically that there is a reasonable expectation from the employer that there will be a minimum of 13 weeks work within 4 weeks. So basically, you can't just be saying, work's on the horizon, we're hoping to get work soon, we're thinking about getting a new contract in. You have to have a reasonable expectation, backed up by evidence, if you're challenged, that there's going to be a minimum of 13 weeks work.
Teams just now, can I give you a call back?
13 weeks work within 4 weeks. Okay, again, just going to the second main bullet point as well. Again, if an employer keeps somebody on short-time working or layoff for an unreasonably long period of time in a quite underhand method of trying to avoid making redundancy payments, again, that could be seen as that fundamentally breaching action and might be a constructive dismissal risk as well. Now, where employees are put onto what's known as workless days, so if they are put onto short-time working where there is specific days where they are no longer given work, or if they're laid off entirely, where there is a whole series of days when they're not given work, then they are called workless days. And for the first 5 days of any 3-month period, then they are due what's known as a statutory guarantee payment, an SGP. Now, that's a maximum of £31 per day for 5 days. So by my O-level arithmetic, that's £155, I think they get in total. So as you can see there, for the final 2 bullet points there, as examples, if somebody's put onto layoff for an extended period of time, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, then the first full 5 workless days of those 2 or 3 weeks, the person will be due a statutory guarantee payment. However, if they're if they're an alternative to be put off on layoff, they're put on short-time working, they're only losing perhaps 1 day per week or 2 days per week. Bearing in mind you have to go below 50% of the week's pay, then, for example, the first 5 Fridays or the first 5 Thursdays of the of the short-time working would be the workless days, and the staff members would be due the £31 per day as well. Now, there are some statutory requirements, some thresholds that the employees have to have before they can get a statutory guarantee payment. Number 1, they have to have been with you for longer than a month. They have to have 1 month's continuous employment or more. It can't be due to a strike or a lockout or some other industrial action situation. The workless day has to be, shall we say, generated from the employer's side in a short-term working or layoff situation. And also, the employee cannot unreasonably refuse an offer of alternative work from the employer. So what I've heard from some metalworking organisations is very often or sometimes welding work reduces. But what they have elsewhere is some grinding work for the welders to do. Now, I understand that grinding work is seen as a kind of low-level work for welders, but it's still something they're expected to do. So if you had welders who were being released on short-time working or layoff, but you were able to give them work on what would otherwise be a workless day, grinding work, and they unreasonably refuse it, then that might absent them from getting the statutory guarantee payment as well. And further, as per the last bullet point, the employee must reasonably comply with the employer to keep their services available. So if they're placed on layoff, they can't disappear off to the Bahamas, even if they had the money to do so. They have to make themselves reasonably available for work should it come in as well. Now, that was a gallop through short-time working in layoff. please, anyone have any questions just now? Happy to take them, or you can got my email address if something pops into your head in 5-10 minutes time. I'm happy to answer things by email as well.
That was very good, thank you.
I'm just being sent a message by my boss. The statutory guarantee payment rate goes up later on this month to £35. So it goes from £31 to £35 as well. So unless there are any further questions just now, I'll stop the recording, send that out to people later on, along with a copy of the slides. And as I say, any further questions, please feel free to give me a shout. Okay, folks, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.